So what are the jobs people will do when they've completed the unit? What are the tasks they need to do in those jobs? Who are they going to work with in those jobs? And what kind of challenges are they going to encounter in their day-to-day work? And also any resources that they require to do that job. So documents, physical resources, and so on. And at the end of it, we really want to understand what competence looks like in that role. And so ways we use AI to assist that analysis process. We'll actually get it to create case studies. So we'll feed in some of those prompts and tell us how would this actually be used in the real world, and it will create little case studies, and that can help the instructional designer to understand the unit they're writing, and also exactly what that particular unit is about. We'll also ask it to create little scripts and role plays, again, just to understand what interactions that person might be having in their day-to-day work. And all of this stuff, it can be saved and it can help form the foundation of tasks, role plays, observations, and things that are in the actual assessments as well. So we store all of this as part of our process too. And we also ask it to organize information for us. So in this case, we've taken the performance criteria under element 3 and asked it to create a table where it breaks down that PC into what a real world task would be involving that, all the steps that would be involved in doing that in the real world, and then a list of the workplace evidence required to demonstrate those skills. And so this is really forming the structure of our assessment, because we have a list of things we need to do to demonstrate skills and a list of the evidence, so things we might need to create to support that assessment. Next, we'll move on to the design stage. And so that's where we compile all of our key findings from our analysis. We prepare information to fit our learning and assessment forms. We transfer all of that into our templates we have for learner resources and trainer manuals, and we plan out which methods of assessment we're going to use at each step. And so the learning structure we've developed over the years basically has all of the essential learning outcomes as chapters. We put the performance criteria sub-chapters, and then within each sub-chapter we work out which performance evidence and knowledge evidence will be addressed there. And we also follow a tell, show, do format in designing learning resources. And so we add formative activities, so there is a do stage in each learning resource as well. And so this might be a little bit small on your screen, but this is the template which basically shows how we've done that. And we've mapped out elements into headers, subchapters, titles. We've listed out all the performance evidence we're going to address, the knowledge evidence we'll address, and then a plan of how we'll tell the student that information, how we'll show the student that information, and how we'll get the student to do that task in practice in a formative assessment task. And then we get a validator to go over that and just do a check and make sure we've covered everything off in sufficient detail before we proceed any further. So the assessment structure, we plan out knowledge evidence to be addressed in the knowledge assessments. We plan out practical requirements to be in the practical assessments. And the practical is where we actually plan out workplace tasks. So not just providing a practical assessment, but a practical assessment in context. So for example, maybe the same unit's used in aged care and childcare. So we might plan, if we're developing a childcare version, we'll plan out how those practical assessments will be done in a childcare context. And then if we write it for an aged care, we'd plan how those assessments are done in an aged care work context. Again, we use ChatGPT here to help kind of formulate some of the tasks that we might be covering. And so you can get it to actually help map out performance criteria that we've mapped to the task, the foundation skills that will be covered, performance evidence that will be mapped to that task. And the brief description down the bottom here is actually kind of a description of what the task will be. And this is what we will develop further to form the actual practical assessment when we finish developing the unit. And we transfer that into our practical assessment plan. So let's just make sure we've covered off everything we require for that practical assessment, and we can just double check that we've covered everything in sufficient detail. So we use a range of assessment types in our development as well. So for summative assessments, we use a lot of short answer, essays, projects, case studies, practical assessments, observation forms, vocational placements. And we do use role plays, and I put an asterisk on that, and I'll come back to that. Some things we don't use in summative, but we do use in formative, multiple choice, true, false, task-based activities, so matching, and so also matching text to images or images to text. And so one of the big things I think we've seen with a lot of off-the-shelf training resources and also some from in-house developers is they don't have sufficient formative learning activities. And that is really critical to help form your volume of learning evidence when you go to audit. And it's a critical compliance thing that ASQA is now really focusing on. So if you are developing resources, make sure you do have formative tasks, practice things for the students to do in the classroom or on their own before they get to the actual summative assessment tasks. So they've had a chance to practice skills or practice their knowledge before they get to the actual assessment. On the role play front, the problem we've had here is that role plays often assume, they'll tell people you're playing the role of a manager, for example, and that person has zero qualification or experience to be a manager. And so what we have to do to have a compliant role play these days is we provide briefing documents to the student and the volunteer who will be doing the role play with the student. And so we give them some specific prompts for things they can do or say. And we also provide a lot of context and background information so they understand why they're in the role play, what's involved, the things they kind of need to cover off. We generally don't script things unless we need some really specific answer. So an example is a student might need to get a specific address from the person doing the role play with them. In that case, we have a script, and it would tell the student would ask the person for the address, and the person would give a specific address back. However, if you do write scripts, don't give the script with the answers to the student. So you can't give a script with all the responses that the volunteer would give back to the student for asking questions, or the responses the student would give if the volunteer asks them questions. It's effectively giving them the answers to the assessment, and that's a non-compliance. So just be careful around scripting and what you give to the volunteer doing the role play versus the student participating in the role play. And this is our planning and design template, and I will send out an email with a copy of the slides at the end of the presentation, and I'll give you a download link to download our planning and design template as well, which is quite a comprehensive document. So next we move on to our development phase. And so we have 5 key steps we go through here. So we have our initial development with our subject matter expert input. We then go through rounds of validation, rectification, and reviews and sign-offs by our subject matter expert and validator. And finally, we push that to our QA and publishing team to finalize. And so most of the work has really been done during the analysis and design phases because you've already kind of planned everything out at that stage. So development is more about taking those outputs you have and refining them and fleshing them out with all the ideas and instructions to create a complete training resource. And so again, we use AI really extensively here to help develop those ideas, add the instructions, and fill in the blanks that were left during our development and design phase. We do template everything as well. So we have standardized templates for our learner resources, which has all of our styling, fonts, formatting, icons, things like that already built into the template. So that as we're creating sections, we can just paste them into the document and they'll be filled out. It's also got all generic instructions that you might put into every unit around your organization, how you do things, general information the student requires. We do the same thing with our learning activity booklets as well for our formative activities. We also have templates for all of our assessment documents. So our knowledge evidence, our practical assessments. We do observation form templates, assessors checklist templates. And we also have templates for our team to use during their process. So this is a SME review and feedback form. So when the subject matter expert reviews the content, they can basically check off which has been done and which has been missed, and leave any comments they have, and provide that back to the developer. and we do minutes for any consultation we have with an SME, so we can record any important information or context they provided to the developer, and just make sure we have a record of that. And once the SME is done with their review of the materials, they'll sign off an SME acceptance certificate. And so that's for our record, but we also provide that to all of our clients who purchase the training resources, so they have evidence that we've completed that process during the development cycle. We also have a pre-publishing checklist. So this is for our developer to do, just to check that they've covered off the basic formatting and style requirements before they submit their finished document to the QA and publishing team for final sign-off. So next we have the implementation phase of ADDI. And so for us, that's pretty straightforward. We have a commercial training resource product, so we take that out and we market and sell that to TAFEs, RTOs, schools, colleges all over Australia and the world. But for you as a training resource in-house publisher or potentially a freelancer or something, it might look a little bit different. So contextualization of resources is really important. I'll come back to that later in more detail. But you'll also need to plan out things like your session, lesson, or webinar plans. You might want to go and find some additional readings or information to supplement the learning content, YouTube videos, for example. You'll need to plan your classroom or webinar activities. You might need to acquire extra resources, so physical tools or props or dummies or equipment the student needs to use. And if the course has a vocational placement, plan out how you're going to set up and run compliant vocational placements for your students as well. Next, we move on to the evaluation stage. So for us, that looks like processes like we do client surveys. We have a help desk system which tickets all of our all our support requests from our clients. So everything gets addressed and goes into our continuous improvement register. We do provide an audit rectification guarantee on our training resources as well. So fortunately, because we have pretty stringent development processes, we don't get a whole lot of audit feedback or audit problems. But when we do get something, we analyze that, we complete the rectifications, and we roll that out to all of our clients free of charge. So everyone benefits from that feedback as well. And everything gets logged in our continuous improvement register. And we've got a number of dashboards and reports that basically help us see any big picture trends or problems in our development style. ASQA is constantly raising the bar, and suddenly we might see some issue popping up. And we know that we've got to adjust how we do our development to address the latest compliance requirement or compliance focus from ASQA. So for you as an in-house developer, it might look a bit different. So you might need some processes around trainer and assessor feedback, student surveys, or industry consultations and surveys to get people's feedback on how the resources work in practice or any issues they see with the content or style. Obviously, you'll run your validation moderation sessions. So it is a compliance requirement for you. So that can form part of your continuous improvement evidence as well. You might work with RTO consultants, either for validation moderation or just to do internal audits and provide some advice on what they're seeing in the industry, the current trends. Obviously, you'll be audited at some point, so that audit feedback, again, forms part of your continuous improvement and evaluation. And something you might consider tracking are your student engagement and completion rates, just so you can keep an eye, because you can dashboard that and report on it pretty regularly. So you can see if students are getting stuck at a particular unit or a phase of their studies, and identify if there's maybe an issue somewhere with your training resources. So some really common compliance concerns that we have seen come up a lot, and funnily enough, I wrote this slide a while ago and ASQA's emailed advice that basically says the same thing, so our feedback mechanisms are working. So big one is, can you demonstrate volume of learning? Do you have sufficiently detailed assessment benchmarks? Can you show where unit requirements are actually met in your training resources? And do your students get a chance to practice skills prior to assessment? So in terms of volume of learning and practicing skills, we write really robust learner resources. We pack them full of images and diagrams. We reference our sources for the content, and we provide links to further information and videos so that there's more things there for you to access and for the students to study during their learning. In our PowerPoints, we basically pull out all of the key learnings, and that's